Hello, I'm Charles Kovess, Australasia's passion provocateur. Welcome to this week's episode of the Charles Kovess Show, whether you're watching on Rumble or on YouTube or listening on one of the many podcast platforms. It's great to have you. I'll discuss one or two local or global challenging issues and what we might do about those issues using the principles of the self-awareness and passion quest, which is designed to help you live life on your terms. The show notes give you links to the foundational principles of this show and details about my background, and also give you links to our two websites, charleskovess.com and kovess.com. And if you want a link to the industrial hemp website, that's also worthy of note, it's textilecomposite.industries, and industrial hemp is going to play a crucial role in your future and mine in the years to come. So what's the big issue this week? Well, it's politicians behaving badly. You might smile at that and say they always behave badly. Well, I'm particularly passionate and pissed off about the litany of bad behaviour, and I want to explore what we do about it, and I want to reinforce that these politicians are elected by us. They are our servants. We are not their servants. We must stop treating them as some sort of demigods. Times have certainly changed. We are now getting ever more information about the behaviour of these politicians. Imagine 50 years ago when I was a kid. The information that was available was much scarcer than what it is now. So we are having this put right into our face about the numbers of times that politicians behave badly. In the past, they would get away with it because we didn't know. Now we know. What are we going to do about it? We elect them. We have to learn how to hold them accountable in ways that are in alignment with the way we want to live our lives. We can't spend our lives constantly holding them to account, but we can set up systems to make sure that we hold them to account. Now, let me run through the litany of their bad behaviours in Australia and around the world that is exercising my mind. Firstly, there was a Senate inquiry in Australia to inquire into excess deaths since the release of the COVID jabs. A Senate inquiry. They said nothing to see here. It was only got through by one vote to have the inquiry, and compelling evidence given to them. No, not going to do anything here. Corrupt decision. Next, the Victorian economy, Victoria, the state in which I live. It is suffering the litany of 9 years of leadership by the worst premier in history, Daniel Andrews. And in yesterday's Australian newspaper, look at this article. It says, "Oh, Victoria. Oh, Victoria." And it says this, the subtitle is, "The state's Victoria's fiscal mess has its roots in socialism that undermined old civic virtues." And another comment, "Victorian government spending has more than doubled in the decades since Daniel Andrews took power, increasing at almost twice the economy's growth rate. Meanwhile, with revenues falling below spending, state government debt has grown by an eye-watering 319%, outpacing the economy's overall growth 5 times over." In other words, Victoria is heading down the road of Venezuela and a series of failed states just through incredible borrowing. And who benefits from this borrowing? A tiny elite. And that's the purpose of the article, to point out which elites, which trade unions, which socialists are getting the benefit of this borrowing, the burden of which falls on all Victorians. Daniel Andrews was a disaster in so many ways, none the least of which was this incredible debt burden, let alone the corruption. Next, from 2020, the response of the Australian government and state governments to an alleged pandemic, which was in fact fake, has burdened this country enormously, and governments are hiding the impact by record numbers of immigrants coming into this country, causing massive, massive problems. Who has thrived in this environment? The answer is big business and the wealthy. The data keeps being published about how good the lockdowns and the government responses around the world have been for big business and the wealthy. There has been a decimation of the financial position of the middle classes. That's not an accident, because if the middle class have resources, they can push back against government. If you're desperate for food, clothing, shelter, there's no way you can hold politicians to account. The alliance between big business and government is the classic definition of fascism. It's a totalitarian, dictatorial regime where any questioning of the regime gets snuffed out. And of course, that's why it gets difficult to hold these bastards to account, because of the threats of because of the threats, because of the power of big business aligned with government. Next, the personal wealth of politicians who, when they come into politics, don't have much money. When they leave politics, huge monies. I've had it reported by a candidate for election that Daniel Andrews' wealth is above $70 million. I've had another report, it's above $80 million. Nancy Pelosi, recently retired US politician, her wealth was reported as $198 million from a zero start. Politicians who get wealthy whilst being in politics, primarily, we must be suspicious of it, primarily highly likely to be caused through corrupt practices of being bought. How did they accumulate all this wealth while they're busily representing your interests? Next, the MAD bill, the misinformation and disinformation bill that's being brought into Australia and around the world, where governments can punish people for daring to talk misinformation or disinformation as defined by government, but government is not governed by the same legislation. In other words, they want to stop me talking about this stuff because they will define it as misinformation, disinformation. This MAD bill is a massive attack on your freedom of speech, on my freedom of speech. Now, let me assure you, I am going to pay no attention to this legislation if it comes into being, because each one of us should not be complying with it. Each one of us must speak up. But this is politicians behaving badly writ large. They're exempt from it. We're not. They can call anything a lie, a misinformation, disinformation. They can do what they like. That's bad. Next, the influence of Big Pharma on politicians. The evidence in Australia, America, Canada, UK, massive. I can unpack that influence, but pharmaceutical companies are essentially funding the regulators of pharmaceutical products. And I come back to where I started, that excess deaths are being caused by the influence of Big Pharma on politicians. Big Pharma must be held to account. So what do we do about it? Well, the starting point is your self-awareness and your passion. You go, well, I can't do anything about it individually. Not many of us can do things about it. But the self-awareness is to say, what is my life about? Is my life about comfort and doing nothing about these politicians behaving badly? What about your children? What about your grandchildren? And what are you passionate about? I'm passionate and pissed off about what is being done to humanity through badly behaving politicians. Because remember, we give them the power and we trust them to use that power wisely, but they're not. And so I challenge you with the question, what are you passionate about? And what does your own integrity demand of you to do? An example of this is Scott Shara, an American in Wisconsin who I moderated a meeting with him talking about his daughter Grace, who was murdered by the hospital system, by the Wisconsin hospital in 2021, in October 2021, in fact. And his passion to avenge the unlawful murder of his daughter, Grace, a 19-year-old girl with Down syndrome. It was the hospital protocol. His website is medicalmurder.net. His passion is to avenge her, Grace's death, and to hold the hospital to account. And that hospital is behaving as it is because of the decisions of American politicians. Similar in Australia. You can get involved in the political process. You can go to local government council meetings. I'll give you an example of that. On Friday night this week, the Port Hedland Council in Western Australia had a special meeting of council to consider taking steps to hold politicians to account for the decisions made on these mRNA jabs. And they, to their credit, voted 5-2 in favour of taking the steps to hold the federal and state governments to account. And the debate that went for some 3 hours, it considered that issue. Well, if we push back against state and federal governments, our funding will be reduced. And the council said, hey, we've got to protect our residents. There's no point protecting our funding source if our residents are dying. The next thing we can do is to track politicians after they leave politics. And I hope you're tracking how much coffee I'm drinking. Oh, that is so beautiful. We need to track politicians. We need to track their wealth so that anyone who comes into politics now knows they're going to be tracked, and existing politicians know we are going to be tracking them. I've got a process going called Track Dictator Dan. I want people to publicise every step that man takes for the rest of his life so that he doesn't get away with the corruption and the illegalities of his actions whilst in power. And politicians in power today need to understand that we are going to track their behaviours, track their actions, and track their wealth, and hold them to account, and force them to disgorge wealth that they have acquired inappropriately, unethically, immorally, illegally. If we warn existing politicians that we're going to track them, that will help to keep them on the straight and narrow, because they are our servants. It's up to us to hold them to account, because if we take no interest, they'll keep doing exactly what they have been doing in ever increasing amounts. I'll finish by saying the future of my country, the future of your country, depends on you. I am responsible for Australia's future. I'm not accountable. I'm indirectly accountable. My grandchildren might say to me, hey, why didn't you do anything? But you and I, as citizens of our respective countries, are personally responsible for what happens to this country. And this is the self-awareness question. Are you willing to take personal responsibility, or are you just going to play victim and go, I can't do anything about it, I'm just going to live my life? I say you can do something about it. Each one of us can do something about it. I urge you to think about what, out of many options, you are going to do about it, because if we don't, you and I are part of the problem. So, I hope I have provoked your thinking in some way. I am, after all, Australasia's passion provocateur. And I hope that provocation helps you to continue to increase your ability to live life on your terms, with ever increasing self-awareness, so that you are making decisions in your life so that you live a life that has meaning for you, that is fulfilling for you, that is on purpose for you. If you're new to the show, check the links to the foundational principles of the show and my background, and also have a look at our websites, where there are plenty of free resources and wonderful information will help you in your life, in your decision making. Again, thanks for watching or listening. Have a wonderful week, and may it be full of passion, full of challenge, and full of your willingness to embrace the challenges that life gives you, and that you learn to live each day on a basis of being grateful for this gift of life that we have. See you next week. Bye.